Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thanks for joining me today for another episode of Next Frontier in Insights. Today, I'm extremely excited to have Lydia Michael join me for an enlightening conversation that we'll have around her book, Brand Love. I came across her book back in the fall of last year. She had just published the book. And as I went through the book, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I need to talk to her. So a couple of things happened. Number one, I was able to connect with her, and that's why we are here today. So, Lydia, welcome to the show.
Hi, Yogesh. Thank you for having me.
So, I wanted to kind of give the audience a little bit of an understanding first about who you are. You're a brand strategist, you're an adjunct professor, you're an author. So, tell us about you. What's your story? Let's start with that first.
So my story is really, where do I start? So let's just talk about right now. So like you said, I run a multicultural marketing and brand consulting firm, which is Blended Collective. So I do that in my day to day. That really keeps me busy. I just wrapped up my first semester teaching digital marketing at a university here in Michigan. Uh, so first semester is done, getting ready to do the second one here. So that's been a very, different experience, but I've really enjoyed bringing some of the day-to-day experiences and case studies and really the real life hands-on, business world into the classroom. So that's been fun. And then I authored my first book, Brand Love, just last year. And that's been an amazing journey and honestly has opened so many doors and just things are happening that I did not plan for. So I'm excited. I'm here for all of it. And yeah.
Amazing. So, talk to us about your book, Brand Love: Building Strong Consumer Brand Connections. Right? It's a powerful title already. But the moment
Mm,
you say brand love, it gets everybody's interest, right? So,
yeah.
even for the audience that's on today, we have a global audience from around the world
Mhm.
who are listening in. Talk to me about what was the genesis behind the book.
So the book, now I say the book was really meant to be, honestly, because I've been occupying my mind and just my work with the topic of brand love since 2016,
Mhm.
which is when I was living in Germany at the time. And I was working at L'Oreal in Germany and writing my master thesis with them. And the topic of my master thesis was focused around a rebrand for a hair care brand using the concept of brand love. And I had no idea at the time. Like you said, the title and the name, the strategy is very intriguing off
Mhm.
the start, but it really didn't tell me much at the time. And so I really fell in love with the topic itself. And when I came back to the US and I started working in the field and started speaking nationally at marketing conferences about this very same topic, I started receiving a lot of great feedback and a lot of interest from people. And upon doing a little more research, I felt that or I saw that there was a gap in the marketplace where we talk about brand love um, related to marketing. Of course, it's already there, it's been there, but there's nothing that's defined brand love at the core.
Mhm.
And there was a gap in terms of approaching it from a multicultural aspect. So, there's books, of course, and research on emotional marketing. That's been a thing for decades, and connecting the idea of psychology with marketing. That's not new.
Mhm.
But I felt like there was a need to approach it from a multicultural perspective. And that's also where a lot of my work is focused, and really a big passion of mine is culture and with my cultural upbringing in Germany to Middle Eastern parents. And so I felt like I could really add a unique perspective to that space. And that really is how the idea was born to write that book.
Amazing. So like you said, the concept of emotional marketing has been around for decades. You're totally right. We've all touched it and worked in that situation as well. But given your unique lens, you mentioned multicultural marketing as part of it, right? So how do you define brand love? Let's start with that premise first, and then we can build from there. So.
And that's how I started off in the book. I was doing, again, research, and I was like, there's really no set definition for brand love.
Exactly.
We know it's this feeling, we know it's this emotion, but it's not supposed to be this fluffy idea, right?
Hmm.
So I look at brand love as, in very simple terms, a connection between an emotional connection between customers and a brand.
Hmm.
Very simple terms. But then if you take it one step further, it really is built on the idea of brand desire, brand affinity, and this deep connection that creates a meaningful and long-lasting relationship between customers and brands. And ultimately, the goal of brand love is to reach brand loyalty and advocacy. So every time we talk about brand love, to me, I almost hear brand loyalty, right? It's like, how do I use all these drivers of brand love to
Hmm.
get me to my destination, which is loyalty and advocacy, which
Yeah,
is what every business and every brand wants or
sure.
should want.
You would think, right? So, but I think where people sometimes, I think you're touching on a couple of things here. So I want to just like tease it out a little bit.
Sure.
It's easy to fall into the trap, in my opinion, of it being existing users of the brand and how you're building a higher level of engagement with them, and that's being defined as brand love. But to get those non-users to become users of the brand also requires a journey to get you down that path, right? And you touch on that in your book. So could we start there first? Because I think everybody wants to get new users and new customers to their business and their brand. How is your approach helping drive
Yeah.
that conversation?
Yeah, so the book is really focused around what can I do as a business, regardless of whether you're an entrepreneur, you're a small business, you're a corporation, a nonprofit. It
Mhm,
really is written in a way where there are nuggets and information for everybody. And
mhm.
so I take you on this journey by developing these brand love drivers and the 8 brand love stages in the book.
Okay.
And all of those things combined, I'll talk about them in a second, but
Mhm.
all of those things combined are helping you to achieve brand loyalty at the end. So it's this journey that you go on, and it's made up of all these brand love drivers that to me was inspired by the concept of our brain. So, you've heard people say, are you a right brainer or a left brainer? And all
Mhm.
that means is, are you more emotional? Are you more emotionally focused, or are you more geared towards the logical, analytical side in your
Mhm.
thinking and your doing and all of that?
Mhm.
And I looked at that concept and I thought to myself, you know what? It's very similar in branding. When we brand, when we market, we touch on emotional elements that connect with our customers because that's where the connection happens, the feelings. And matter of fact, when consumers buy, I think research shows that 75% of decisions are based on how somebody feels at the time of purchase.
Yep.
So that just, confirms why emotion is so important. But on the opposite side, rational and functional factors, or drivers, as I call them, are just as important because things like convenience, accessibility, relevance, differentiation, they also make us buy.
Mhm.
Whether we consciously realize that or not, it's
Mhm.
a combination of all of those drivers coming together that make us like a brand, that make us support a brand, that ultimately create that love and that loyalty to the point where even if they are at a premium cost, premium price, right? Even with inflation happening right
Yeah.
now everywhere.
Yeah.
I still see customers supporting the very same brands due to their loyalty. They don't care if it's, going up in price, premium price. They don't care.
Mhm.
That's how loyal they are to the brand. And so in today's age, I think that that's important because we do have so many substitutes. It's a very crowded marketplace. And so it's easy to abandon a brand if for some reason you don't connect with them anymore.
So I get that, and I can think of so many different like use cases, in what you shared already, right? So let's start with a basic one. Like let's take you said you worked on hair care, early in your career. I've worked on hair
Mhm.
care as well.
Oh,
Uh,
did you? Okay.
yeah, I worked for P&G, right? So you're
Oh,
bound
yeah.
to get hair care at some point, right?
Right.
Uh, so when you think about emotion and how it plays in in your 8 stages, maybe you want to just first clarify what those 8 stages are, and then we can talk about how emotion plays a role in that.
Yeah. So the 8 stages, it's basically this model where it's the journey that the customer goes through, anything from like awareness, familiarity, likeness, a trust. So trust is sort of the fifth element in the journey, and that's really a
Yeah.
tipping point
Yeah.
where the make or break relationship happens, right? So if you've earned my trust and we're at this stage, now I can move on to the level of attachment. Attachment love, loyalty, advocacy, right?
Hmm.
And so when we start at the very beginning, of course, there needs to be this awareness, familiarity. If I don't know that you even exist, none of this is even possible, right? So I think that that's across different marketing models throughout the years, a lot of those elements have been communicated in the customer journey.
Right.
I've kind of adapted all of that to, the concept of brand love. But that's what that looks like.
Yeah. So when you connect it back to your hair care example that you were referring to earlier, explain to us, like, how do you move people from being a non-user of the brand to a user in the brand, using those 8 stages that you just talked about?
Mhm.
What are those? Are you talking about emotional triggers? Are you talking about, um, a mindset shift or an attitudinal shift? Just help explain that a little bit more.
Yeah. So that example particularly, and I talk about it in detail in the book, that was Garnier Fructis. And that hair care brand at the time, that was the first rebrand in the German market because there was such a strong disconnect with its core audience, which at the time were millennials and Gen Z.
Hmm.
And that was also the time when everybody started to become more health conscious. So they were paying attention to what they were eating, what they were putting in their skin, what they were washing their hair with, and still like that, right? Not that that
Hmm.
has changed. If anything, it's become more magnified. But that was sort of the core issue, is that there was a disconnect. The brand was being viewed as, for everybody, for anybody that doesn't know the brand, it's very much focused on the scent. So Fructis is all about the different fruits that the shampoo has, and it's about scent. And looking at the packaging at the time, the images were not very authentic. It almost created this um, chemical or engineered look of the
Hmm.
product. And again, with people wanting to be more health conscious and more authentic, there was a disconnect. And so the idea was, how can we create a new product that not only has a new formula, but that also has updated marketing and packaging that resonates with what Gen Z and what the millennial audience is looking for, which is that authenticity. A lot of times it's trust. So those elements were really important to incorporate into the branding, into the marketing, but also into different initiatives we were creating, so that we are able to create the feeling of authenticity. So one
Hmm.
example is on the packaging. When you incorporate the fruit, we made sure to pick a fruit that's realistic, a fruit that you would want to put in your hair and
Hmm.
use as a shampoo, right?
Yeah.
So things like coconut. So research would show that people are looking for coconut masks, or a cucumber is really good, right? Like we know that from skincare. And so making
Yeah.
sure that we're using realistic ingredients, fruit, but that we're also displaying them in a very authentic and genuine way, so that that can even build trust for a customer to then possibly connect with the brand. So
Hmm.
it wasn't so much, if you talk about all of the stages, the awareness was already there because we weren't creating a product that didn't yet exist in the market. I think that's a whole nother story when you do that. And I have case studies in the book for that as well. But recreating a brand, it's almost like going back to the drawing board and figuring out what are the drivers that have worked for us, and what are the drivers we need to push more of, right? So
Hmm.
that closeness, that trust, that efficacy that we were trying to create for the brand. It's interesting with shampoo because the shampoo category is almost like has these must-have essentials, right? But
Yep.
that's not enough to build differentiation. Like a product, like the product quality, the safety, the adaptability, all of those things are important for the hair, but it's not enough to differentiate the brand. So
That's
again, a
right.
lot of it is like the senses, which is a huge differentiator for Fructis, and that brand is the scent that
Yes.
people associate with. And in Germany, that brand, that rebrand was specific to the German market. I can tell you, if that were to happen here in the US with the same brand, I mean, the brand is global, it would be completely different because the customer is different and what the customer looks for is also very different, right?
Yeah.
So Germany, especially with women, they are very simple with the hair care, right? Very simple. They like very
Mhm.
mild scents. That could look very differently in a different culture, right? Where maybe vibrant scents might be more appealing to the audience.
No, you're totally right. Look, I worked on Pantene and Head and Shoulders and Herbal Essences at
Yeah.
P&G, right? We were getting the same kinds of learnings too, right? And I remember, this is, I'm dating myself now. It's a couple of decades ago, but we were trying to change the scent on one of the brands.
Mm,
Every time we would test new scents, which were, we thought were better performing than the existing one,
yeah.
consumers rejected all of them, even in blind testing,
Yeah.
because the moment they smelt that particular product, they were like, I know the brand name,
Wow.
and that's my brand. Don't touch my brand. So that multi-sensorial thing that you talk about, right?
Yes.
And the scent component is so true. It's a trigger in consumers' minds at the end of the day, right? So
And so underestimated, because what actually happens is when
yes.
you smell something, and this happens subconsciously, but anytime we smell something, the part of our brain that recognizes the scent is the
Mhm.
same part that's responsible for emotion and for memory. And
Correct.
so this is why a good scent, or even, not a good scent, an unpleasant scent, it really shapes our experience and our memory in that way.
Absolutely right. And I would say also the same for audio too, right? In a way,
Yeah.
because when people hear certain like jingles or certain things, it evokes nostalgia in their minds,
Yeah.
which is another theme that you talk about from an emotional perspective. That drives it. That also drives emotion too, right? So
Yes. Yeah. And the example I actually give in the book is Burger King with their another rebrand example here, but
yeah,
um, Burger King sort of going back into the archives and rebranding the brand to what it used to be decades ago.
yeah.
And that sort of created a whole nostalgic, feeling and vibe for customers.
Absolutely right. I want to kind of like also bring in some questions from the audience. We have a couple of them that just came through. So,
Yeah.
one question that Brian's asking is, wouldn't brand love amongst existing users bring in non-users through existing users advocating for the brand?
Wait, say that again. I'm sorry.
I'm putting it up on screen here so you can
Oh,
see it.
okay. Mhm.
So, essentially, what he's asking is, are existing users? You talk about advocacy and loyalty, right?
Yeah.
Does that attract non-users to come in through the existing users, basically?
Yeah, that's what advocacy is all about. That's the goal. And that's why I very specifically outline loyalty and advocacy, because I can be a loyal customer, but maybe I'm not
Yeah.
advocating on behalf of the brands or the businesses that I use, right? That's sort of
Right.
that next step beyond loyalty
Mhm.
that really shows how maybe like the level of satisfaction or that desire to share my experience and the brand that I'm using with other people, because I have such a good experience and I want other people to have the very same feeling.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, absolutely. That's what it is.
Another question from Jill. You could be loyal to the brand but not love it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think that's true. I think a lot of times it depends on the category and the type of product, right?
Mhm.
So I'll give you an example. So for instance, like a cleaning product or Tide. I remember years ago when I was speaking at this conference, I asked this question and I said to people, "What's one brand you can't live without and you will never substitute no matter what?" And somebody came back and said Tide,
Mhm.
cleaning the laundry detergent, and I was like, really? They're like, yeah, I've been so used to using this product since my childhood because it reminds me of my grandmother, and so to me it's like a memory thing. Now
Mhm.
that's great for that example, but now taking this cleaning product, right, and taking it out of that memory, out of that story that that customer has, I could be loyal to a cleaning product because I think it does a really good job at what I need it to do. It needs to be, it needs to clean. It needs to make me feel safe, like all of those different things. Check,
Mhm.
check, check.
Mhm.
But do I love it? Like, is there a love that I have for this product?
Mhm.
It goes back to, I'll give you another example, Zoom.
Mhm.
Zoom, I think, is a very good example. And I had somebody, a marketing executive, actually said that he used Zoom throughout the pandemic for his son's first birthday. He attended a wedding. He attended all of these different things, did yoga, all on Zoom, but
Mhm.
had zero connection to the brand.
Interesting.
And that's because sometimes the brands we use are so functional that it's very difficult to connect that element of love and emotion to it.
Mhm.
But I talk about a strategy of how functional brands can actually still manage to do that. So I hope
It's
that answers the question.
You've actually answered two questions because Luis had exactly the question that you just brought up, which is around like the whole COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah,
How did it impact the concept of brand love, right? And your Zoom example actually speaks to that,
it
right?
does. But Louise, so I have, just to add to that, it's a great question. I have a whole chapter dedicated in the book. It's chapter 11 that talks about the love brand lockdown. And that it references the difficult times and challenges and how brand love changes. And it very much changes because brand love is dependent on the customer needs as well.
Hmm.
And so customer needs and wants change when times get difficult and when budgets get tight. People
Hmm.
become more intentional with how they spent their money and
Hmm.
who they support. And we saw that values, the core values and what brands stand for was so important throughout the pandemic. And even now with, the political landscape and brands now coming out and sharing their opinion and sharing their voice, it either, brings along more supporters from a customer perspective, or they lose customers because of it.
Yeah.
And so that's a whole nother thing.
So I'm going to put you on the spot because you're going exactly in the place where I was thinking about. We all heard what happened this week with TikTok, right? The government basically is passed legislation and signed this week,
Yeah.
potentially banning TikTok, right? What are your thoughts on from your lens of brand love? What would be your thoughts about TikTok and how consumers are going to react to this change?
So I'm not going to make this about the news of TikTok.
Right.
Here's what I'm going to say. And I've been saying this for a long time, and I feel like this is proof to, share that again. As a business and as a brand, we heavily rely on social media. The social media space is rented. You don't own that space. So if TikTok were to really go away, and there's so many brands that have seen so much success from TikTok, my
Mhm.
question is, how do you ensure that you continue to connect with those customers? Do you know who those customers are? And this goes back to the importance of an email list. A
Mhm.
lot of people think, oh, nobody reads emails, nobody opens emails. Email marketing is actually one of the best ways for you to connect with your customer and to get customers to buy not just your products and services, but to get them to buy into who you are and to connect with you. And
Mhm.
that's because you're creating a direct stream of communication versus having to rely on Facebook or TikTok or any of these channels. Because even when we post now, and Facebook's algorithm, for instance, changes constantly. It's
Yep.
so difficult to keep up with. And it used to be where anytime you would post, it would show up to at least all of your followers or connections. That's not even the case anymore. You have to pay to get in front of everybody that's already supporting you on the platform. So again, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, regardless of what platform we talk about, I encourage people to own the connection, to own the relationship through email, through a direct communication stream,
Mhm.
to avoid these challenges.
Well, no, that's a fair point, right? And obviously, brands, at least on the tech side, you can build out your own first-party data over time,
Yes.
and you can leverage that. I worked at Pinterest, I worked at Spotify. We did that constantly, right? And you can do so many amazing things from using first-party data. And one of
Mhm.
the things you talked about in your book was personalization, which
Yes.
is doable from first-party data.
Mhm.
So talk to us about how you are seeing personalization happen in this shifting landscape that's happening right now. What would be your insights or thoughts on that?
I think there's different ways to achieve that level of personalization. Going back to the example I just shared, is just having that data available, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
without that data, it's very difficult to personalize experiences. That's one thing, but also in the way the products work.
Hmm.
And now in the age of AI and technology, I give the example of a toothbrush that I use, which is the Oral-B,
Hmm.
toothbrush.
Yep.
And I was blown away when I first bought that and how it connected with my phone, and it gave me the data of, was I brushing too long? Was I brushing too little? Like, how can I improve it? Sort of all of that information and that data that's stored that helps me create a better experience or even a better outcome
Hmm.
as to why I'm using the product. It really makes me think about products differently and brands differently, because it's about me, and I feel like the brand is making an effort to get to know me, but to also make sure that they're delivering on something that's important, which also goes into the brand promise, right? So I
Yeah,
think personalization is only going to grow from here. There's a few other examples I mentioned in the book, My Swim Pro, that I think are doing a really great job in connecting with their customer base on a one-on-one level.
amazing. So, oops, are you still there?
I'm here, but you froze up on my end,
Yeah, something's going on with my laptop. So this is unusual. This
but
is
I'm
a
still
first.
here.
Okay, so why don't we continue talking while my laptop figures out what it's doing?
Yes.
Um, talk to us. So you talked about AI, right, and the role AI can play in helping with personalization. That's an important point. There's also the rational part that you talked about, which is convenience and other drivers that are there. Just how do those interlink with the emotional part of it?
So with the drivers, I think it's important. I mentioned briefly that it's important to have both emotional and rational drivers.
Yeah,
And when we have both of those drivers, the more drivers you have, the better. So it's not to say, even when I highlight an example in the book and I reference maybe purpose and sustainability for a brand like Patagonia, that
yeah,
doesn't mean that Patagonia doesn't have any of the other drivers or rational drivers by any means. It just means that they follow these drivers so well that they're almost synonymous with those drivers. So when it comes to the rational drivers, they link up with emotional drivers because as a customer, we're going through this journey with the brand or the business.
mhm,
And we experience a lot of different drivers at the same time, right? So, a brand like Amazon, for instance, does a really good job with convenience. That's a rational driver. But there's other drivers that could come into play, like the driver of trust, for instance,
yeah,
that could be relevant because I trust, for instance, the brand promise that Amazon puts out is that they're going to get me my stuff in a day or two if I'm an Amazon Prime member. I know that if the product doesn't work for me, I can easily return it, right? So there's that trust factor that comes into play, which is an emotional driver. But also, the reason why I'm seeking out a company like Amazon is because they're convenient amongst many other things, maybe, right? The driver
right,
can be different for different people, but I don't think anybody would argue that Amazon stands for convenience very
completely.
strongly. Yeah. I can't see you, by the way.
I know. I was going to say there's a tech issue going on right now, and I don't know how to
Okay,
fix it,
great.
unfortunately, unless if I stop the broadcast, which I don't want to do.
No, yeah, I that's all good as long as
So if you're okay with it, just assume I'm there,
yeah.
and I can hear you. So just a few more questions. You talked early on in the broadcast about that you're also focused on multicultural marketing, right? So
Mhm.
and there's a whole space in that which is definitely an important aspect today for many brands and companies.
Yeah.
Um, in today's environment, with all the stuff that's going on, what are your thoughts about how should a brand approach multicultural marketing today?
So it depends because it's very much focused on your brand and your audience. Everybody's audience is different. I think the key is understanding who your customer is and then being able to strategize or personalize your marketing and your outreach for that audience, right? And you probably have different audiences. So strategies look a little bit different from a cultural perspective for everybody.
Mhm.
But the importance of that is making sure that the business remains relevant. Why relevant? Because we see, based on data that's shared from the US Census Bureau, actually, 20 years from now, 50% of the US population is set to be multicultural.
Right.
And so, if as a brand, as a business, you don't understand how to remain relevant, I like to talk about cultural relevance too. So, relevance can have a lot of different factors. But when we look at cultural relevance, that's important to stay ahead of the game, to make sure that you are connecting on the right level with your customers.
Right. So in that context of relevance, right? I would also link in personalization because you're trying to be relevant to a community and
Mhm.
not just one community, many communities, right?
Yeah.
So how can a brand build out its messaging that would be relevant to the community at the same time be applicable and scale it across multiple communities at the same time? How are you thinking about that?
So I think it really goes back to understanding the customer and who the customer is, but also what are my customers looking for? And then also not forgetting that who am I as a business and as a brand? What do I stand for? What do I represent? And then
Yeah.
making sure that that line of communication is consistent.
Mm.
So am I reaching the people that I want to reach? What do they care about? What do I care about? And how can I align those things, right?
Yeah.
So once you have those values and you have your people that you're building brand desire for, that you're building this affinity for, how can I bring those two together? How can I create initiatives, marketing efforts that
Mhm.
resonate with what this group cares about, right? And I
Yeah.
think once you understand that at the foundation, it becomes more easy to really strategize and figure out how you need to show up and who you need to show up for.
Right. Right. No, that makes sense. So in that context, I'm curious right now, with so much stuff happening around us, I think about, brands like Bud Light from last year. They struggled
Mhm.
last year with this a similar issue at the end of the day, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
And a lot of people have given their opinions about what to do, what not to do, etc. Right?
sure. Yeah.
But I think about it in the context of what you're talking about,
Mm.
and I'm saying, if you really wanted to turn things around for a brand like Bud Light,
Yeah.
let me ask you, what would you have recommended based on your knowledge
Mhm.
base?
Same thing I said right now. Know your customer base. I think if I look at that brand example, to me, it's super simple. I think there was a disconnect with who they thought their customer was and who their customer actually is really it's everything. And once you've established who your customer base is, it doesn't mean that you should stop there because your customer base grows, your customer base evolves, and you as a business and as a brand, you evolve with them.
Mhm.
So continuing to listen, continuing to gather insights and understanding how are those changes affecting how we show up in the world,
Yeah.
right? And aligning that. And I think there was a strong, um, just a misalignment in doing that. It sounds so simple, right? When we say know your customer and know what they want and just deliver on it,
Exactly.
it's easier said than done. But I think for big brands, and I think this is why the disappointment sometimes is so big when we see corporate failures like that, is because we have such high expectations from somebody who is a big brand and who
Mhm.
we assume has the resources to
Mhm.
do better, to say better, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we've seen it across the board, across different industries. I mean, this is just a recent example that happened, but
Yeah.
there's many of them in the past. And I think a lot of times it's really the disconnect. Even just making sure that information is filtered through the right people internally. Whether that's from a cultural perspective to make sure that there's cultural sensitivity in the marketing that's being pushed out, I think is also
Mhm.
another big focus.
I get it. I totally get it. So, just the last couple of questions, and that we can kind of like, and again, I apologize about the black screen. It's
Oh, no worries. I'm
uh,
pretending you're in front of me.
okay. Thank you, and thank you for being so gracious about that.
Right.
The one area that I have a lot of interest in is around brands that operate in stigmatized industries,
Mm,
right? And one of the learnings that I got in the last 12, 15 months is that, to give you an example of what I mean first, think about product categories like hearing aids, or
mm,
um, if you want to go really extreme, not extreme, but like, go more sensitive, it could be even things like erectile dysfunction or menopause brands, or cannabis or psychedelics. These are all industries that have some form of stigma associated with it, right?
mm,
And the learning that I got is that to convince people to buy any of those kinds of products, right? You can talk to them rationally all day long. Half the population is not even going to hear you. If
mm,
you start connecting with them emotionally, then you actually start shifting their mindset to saying, okay, let me at least go try it out, kind of thing.
mm.
Have you come across any of those kinds of experiences yourself in your practice, or not yet?
Yeah, so I don't know if it was necessarily in my practice, but um I know somebody who's visually impaired, and this could be another example. I know you mentioned hearing disabilities, but somebody who is visually impaired and was not able to access a website of a brand who claims to be accessible and inclusive. Here you are. Did you hear everything I said?
I did, yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
So, of a business that claims to be inclusive and accessible and all of those things, and my friend who's visually impaired was not able to access their website because
yeah.
it wasn't accessible, for her needs. And I remember her getting very upset about it and actually reaching out to
Mhm,
the corporate contact
mhm.
and letting them know about it, right? And
Yeah,
so I think that that's one example is where you're actually not allowing people to even connect with you because the cultural sensitivity
mhm,
um, is kind of lacking. So, that's one example. But I think in general, to answer your question, transparency and education in the examples you mentioned, I think are really, really important.
yeah.
Not assuming that people know why we exist or what we do, and
Mhm,
especially if if there's stigma around the product or the service,
mhm.
is why is there a stigma, and how can we turn that around by focusing on the thing that actually matters? What
Yep.
is it that is going to connect with that customer where we can turn that stereotype almost around? So
Mhm,
transparency and communication is
mhm,
everything. I
mhm.
think that's where people also sometimes, even if I don't connect with a brand, if I see the transparency in communication, I have so much respect for the brand and for the
Yeah,
business. And it goes the opposite way too. So when I don't see that transparency, I get really upset. And I'm like, I don't even care if I would potentially like this product. I
yeah,
don't want to try it because they're not transparent, right? So
right.
transparency and education, I think, are big in that world.
No, I'm with you. And look, I've in the process of doing my research, like I actually leaned into the mental health space, where
Yeah.
there's a lot of learnings around how to even diagnose stigma, and
Yeah.
there are like 7 different types of stigma that are actually there, which I didn't even know about until a year ago, right?
Wow.
But when you start applying those kinds of principles into our world of brands and marketing, right? Um, it actually helps you figure out how you are solving or what problem you're actually solving for, right? Because and I'll give you an example on the hearing aid side. One of my friends who does wear hearing aids, I was asking him, you know, what did it take you to actually get to to buying hearing aids? Because in that category, for example, on average, consumers take 7 years from recognizing they have a problem to actually buying a product. It's crazy, right? The
Wow.
stigma is so
Wow.
entrenched, right?
Yeah.
And the way he described it to me was that imagine you're going to a party, you go dressed casually, but when you walk in, everybody's dressed in evening gowns and tuxedos, and you stand out like a sore thumb, right? And
Mm.
everyone's looking at you when you walk in. That's how I feel when I'm wearing hearing aids.
Wow.
And I thought that was such a powerful emotional way of evoking, that response from me in terms of like, oh my, I get what you're going through. Now I get why you don't want to get to buy or wear hearing aids, right?
Mhm.
So it became a question of, okay, well, what does it, is it about you, the person, or is it about how others view you? And when you start diagnosing from that perspective, you're like, okay, it's about the how others view you. So how do you then address that problem versus thinking it was your problem from the very beginning, you know? So
Makes sense.
so for me, like when we bring in stigma and when we bring in the emotion component of it, I think they're like like so interconnected,
Mhm.
because you can't even get to the rational conversation about why is the hearing aid better. They're not even going to hear you.
I agree. That's a very, yeah, and I don't touch on stigmatized industries really in the book, but I feel like um that's a really good addition. Hey, maybe
Well,
for the second edition of the book, I'll pull you in, I'll do an interview.
yeah, sure, why not? Maybe we just on live on air we found a new way to partner. There you
There
go.
you go. Yeah. I love it.
So to end the conversation, one thing that I did I'm also obviously teaching classes at the University of South Carolina. I have to put in a
Yeah.
plug for my university too.
Yep.
I made 2 of my classes read your book, and
Yeah, I love it.
and I wanted to share with you, and I think some of the students might even be on right now, listening
Oh,
into this conversation. So,
hi
uh,
everyone.
so, so apart from them being able to not only read the book, but to relay back to the rest of the class what they learned from a concept perspective,
Mhm.
what really struck me was how creative some of the students were in terms of communicating the concepts of your book. So to give you an example or two, one of the students actually interviewed her friends, asking them, what does authenticity mean to you from a brand perspective, and what brands do you think are authentic? So one of
Yeah.
them talked about Trader Joe's, one of them talked about Patagonia, and they explained exactly how they felt about those kinds of brands, right? Another student, basically, she made a skit with her roommate, where they were playing out, a Starbucks experience, where they basically, she's acting as if she's a barista, and the person's coming in, picking her drink, and she's like, "Hey, I'll see you tomorrow because you got my favorite drink," kind of thing, right?
I
And
love
it
it.
was just so powerfully done in being able to communicate the concepts of your book. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. Like,
Yeah.
you've touched people, and especially young people, in ways that I never imagined, but it's definitely having an impact. So thank you for that. So
Well, thank you so much for sharing that and for introducing the book to the class. That like makes me so happy.
no worries, no worries. Well, look, we're already at 40 minutes, and
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today, even with our technical challenges, unfortunately. But you've been such a great sport, and you've given such great insight to your thoughts, your book, how you view marketing and branding. It's just been an absolute joy. So thank you so much for that.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
You're absolutely welcome. So everybody else, I wanted to just say that we do the show every 2 weeks, deliberately, because I don't want to get into the habit of being like a full-time broadcaster. That's not my day job. I'm doing this for fun, quite frankly speaking. But the fun has actually become a little bit more, how shall I say, disciplined. So a couple of things for anybody who's listening in. Number one, I have a separate page I've created on LinkedIn, a business page called Next Frontier in Insights, which is the name of this podcast. You'll find all the previous podcast in that page, along with the next podcasts that are coming up. So I would encourage everybody to subscribe to that, so that you're able to follow, the new ones that are coming up. Importantly, don't forget to follow Lydia, and don't forget to follow me personally as well on LinkedIn. I think we would both appreciate that. We would love to hear your stories as well. I'm speaking on your behalf, but I'm guessing you'd appreciate it as well. Um,
Definitely, yeah. And we actually, the Kogan page this week for the next week
yeah.
has 25% off the book Brand Love. I just posted about it this morning, so check it out.
There you go. Perfect plug. Perfect plug. So yeah, definitely buy our book. I would highly encourage that. It's a great read. On May 9th, we have Danielle McConnell, who's the global head of marketing at WordWay. WordWay is a company that actually creates and builds out the metaverse. And one of the things I've been very fortunate, in the situation, is that I've been able to actually use WordWay's metaverse to play around with it and just see how the experience looks like. And in fact, we had a couple of my classes go through that experience where we had all the students sign up, and we were doing an in-class situation in the metaverse. So I'll actually be sharing about that next week, on my blog post as well. But do sign up for that show. It's coming up on May 9th. And I thank again, Lydia, for a wonderful conversation today,
Thank
and see
you.
everybody soon. Bye.
Bye.